ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਗ੍ਰੈਂਡ ਤਾਜ ਸਰੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪਹੁੰਚੇ ਹਾਂ। ਇੱਥੇ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਆਫ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਰੈਫਿਊਜੀਜ਼ ਐਂਡ ਸਿਟੀਜ਼ਨਸ਼ਿਪ ਮਿਸਟਰ ਮਾਰਕ ਮਿਲਰ ਆ ਰਹੇ ਹੈ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਿ ਆਪਣੀ ਸਾਊਥ ਏਸ਼ੀਅਨ ਪ੍ਰੈਸ ਐਂਡ ਦੂਸਰੇ ਪ੍ਰੈਸ ਮੈਂਬਰਸ ਹੈ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਹੋਊਗੀ। ਕਾਫੀ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੁਐਸਚਨ ਹੈ ਰਿਗਾਰਡਿੰਗ ਦਾ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੇਸ਼ਨ। ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸਟੂਡੈਂਟਸ ਆਏ ਹੈ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਓਪਨ ਵਰਕ ਪਰਮਿਟ 'ਤੇ ਹੈ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਡਰਾਅ ਹੈ ਕਾਫੀ ਹਾਈ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ। ਸੋ ਲੋਟ ਆਫ ਕੰਸਰਨ। ਸੋ ਅੱਜ ਇਹ ਦੇਖਣ ਵਾਲੀ ਗੱਲ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਹੈ ਉਸ ਨੂੰ ਕਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਹੈਂਡਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ, ਅਤੇ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਪਤਾ ਲੱਗੂਗਾ ਕਿ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਫਾਈਨ ਟਿਊਨ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਆ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਪ੍ਰੋਸੈਸ, ਬਿਕਾਜ਼ ਦੈਟਸ ਦ ਬਿਗ ਵਨ ਇਨ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ। ਸੋ ਇਟ ਵਿਲ ਬੀ ਗੁੱਡ ਟੂ ਸੀ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਇਸ 'ਤੇ ਕਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਹੈਂਡਲ ਕਰਦੇ। ਇਸ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਮੈਂਬਰ ਆਫ ਪਾਰਲੀਮੈਂਟ ਸੁਖ ਧਾਲੀਵਾਲ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਿ 5 ਟਾਈਮ ਮੈਂਬਰ ਆਫ ਪਾਰਲੀਮੈਂਟ ਹੈ ਫਰੋਮ ਸਰੀ ਨਿਊਟਨ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਜੁਆਇਨ ਕਰਨਾ। ਸੋ ਦੋਨੇ ਜੈਂਟਲਮੈਨਸ ਤੋਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹ ਕੁਐਸਚਨ ਪੁੱਛਾਂਗੇ ਕਿ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਪਾਲਿਸੀ ਕਰੰਟ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੀ ਚੱਲ ਰਿਹਾ। CJ ਸਿੱਧੂ ਰਿਪੋਰਟਿੰਗ ਫਰੋਮ ਗ੍ਰੈਂਡ ਤਾਜ ਸਰੀ, ਬ੍ਰਿਟਿਸ਼ ਕੋਲੰਬੀਆ।
It is good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I want to thank each and every one of you coming out today to have discussion with the Honorable Minister. I have had the privilege to sit with the Minister for last 3 terms, and I can tell you he has held many portfolios, but this is one of the toughest, difficult files that's been given to the minister. And since he have taken over this file, and every day he has a passion to make sure that that the improvements can be made. Now, I sit on the Immigration, Citizenship and Refugee Committee and chair that, and I have the opportunity to work with him very closely. And I can tell you, he's very accessible when it comes to asking him to the committee meetings and present it there. So where I can say that this is one of those ministers that is there to make a difference in people's lives. With further ado, I will welcome Honorable Minister Marc Miller to the beautiful part of British Columbia, which is Surrey Newton. Everything happens right here. Minister Miller, stage is yours.
Thank you, Sukhji. I think you said it right. Everything happens in Surrey Newton. It's nice to see a lot of you for the first time. Some familiar faces. Sukh has brought me here a couple times to meet members of the community. And now a broader opportunity to meet members of the press. I want to first highlight the role that you play in making sure that accurate, reliable information gets out to all your readers in the mediums that you use, whether it's community outreach or even broader outreach internationally. I think Canadians rely on you to make sure that the information is accurate and contributes to the democracy that we have in this country that is very important. That starts with dialogue. Sometimes positions that we don't necessarily share, but we owe it to you as politicians to give you truthful answers. Whether you like the answers or not, they have to be accurate and based in the facts, and I wanted to highlight the role that you play in doing that. As Sukh mentioned, particularly on an important topic, for all Canadians in immigration, that has been, one of the top topics discussed in this country over the last few months, over the last year, the course of the year where I have been the minister. It's just under a year that I became the Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada. Before that, I was the Minister of Indigenous Affairs in 2 portfolios for 4 years. Canada isn't immune to a lot of the discussion, some criticism around immigration to countries that are highly sought after around the world. Canada is the top destination for many countries where people are looking to build a life, sometimes to seek refuge, but also to contribute to who we are as Canadians and to build the still a young country that is Canada. What Canadians have been telling us, regardless of the length of time that they've been here, over the last, as we have looked and done strategic reviews of our departments, as my provincial counterparts have done the same, is that there still is a positive view of immigration in Canada, but it isn't one that isn't without scrutiny. People want an immigration system that makes sense, that is rigorous, that people can say to themselves, this makes sense for the economy, this makes sense for the public policies that we have, whether it is to promote French in communities outside Quebec, inside Quebec, whether it is to fulfill particular economic goals and fill labor gaps, whether it is to make sure that a number of newer Canadians that are looking to have their families reunified get that opportunity. And these aren't opportunities that go without boundaries. They are ones that we have to look at in the context of levels that we set every year for permanent residency and citizenship that are at relatively historic highs. It's no secret to anyone that has been studying the issue, and I suspect around this room, that we have an affordability challenge in this country, starting with interest rates that have been at levels that we haven't seen in decades. We have had much criticism around perhaps the volume of people that are here temporarily. We are at historic highs when it comes to temporary residents for a variety of reasons. As a comparator to the population, now close to 7% of the population in Canada, according to Statistics Canada, are people that follow under the category of temporary residents. So they are not permanent, they're not Canadian citizens, and that has come with issues in and around how that impacts housing, how that impacts affordabilities, the provision of services, healthcare services, infrastructure needs. And those are all ones that we need to tackle in a reasonable way as politicians. Otherwise, we fall into too quickly discussions that are unreasonable, and we see that in different countries that have faced this challenge. We also have a historic number of people that are fleeing violence, whether it's in particular Ukraine, 300,000 Ukrainians that are here fleeing a nuclear aggressor in Russia. We are a country that has said quite clearly we will support those people. We have a historic amount of international students, and particularly to here in Surrey, half of the designated learning institutions that welcome those people are situated here in Surrey. And that has come with numbers that are well beyond those that we have seen in the past. That is limited to, that analysis is generally limited, not exclusively, but to two provinces, British Columbia and Ontario, where we have seen large numbers of temporary residents in the category of students and the postgraduate work permits that come with them that have been quite high in the last while. We need to get that under control, and there is a lot of blame to go around. There's a lot of credit to go around to the institutions that have been responsible, but this is about a system that has gotten a bit hot and that we need to, as a government, take a look at and say, how do we bring that back to what the original intent of a visa program was, to make sure that we are attracting the best and brightest, that if they stay in the country, there are jobs for them, and that their money isn't just taken from them by unscrupulous actors that are just looking to make $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 and not care about these young minds that in some cases their whole families have put their hopes and dreams into. So these are challenges that Canadians are looking for us to solve in a reasonable, rational way. And that comes with some important discussions, debates, perhaps disagreements with provinces and the institutions that welcome them as to how we do that. I have I'm not a person that is judge, jury, and executioner. I have ideas, I have a role, I have a responsibility, but I am not the ultimate decider in these things. It comes with proper discussions with economic actors, with institutions themselves, and those that want to welcome people on a temporary basis, with perhaps a discussion about how they become permanent and how they become Canadian citizens, or have to take a decision whether to go home and take their talents to another country. So these are all issues that fall into a greater category of affordability. And when we talk about immigration, we have to remember that there has been incredible good that has come to Canada through immigration. A number of you around the table are proof of that. But it doesn't come without a discussion about how we make sure that we can stand up to Canadians and say, is this the way we go as a country? Is this how we contribute to the economy? And how do we do this in a way that is responsible in the context, particularly the geopolitical context that we face with our main economic partner to the south that has a particular view on these things, and an integrated economy that does not necessarily operate independently. I didn't plan a long opening speech to tell you what to ask me. I'm really here to answer your questions in an open fashion, and I won't take much more time, but I do want to again thank you, as I did in the opening, for the work that you do and the important role that you play in our democracy that is important now more than ever. So thank you so much. Thank you, Sukhji, for inviting me here today to speak to your local media and international media.
Thank you, brother. Mr. CJ Sidhu.
Welcome to Surrey, Minister Miller. And my question alluding to same you already mentioned about the international students. So international students came here, finished their degrees, they are on an open work permit. And what's happening now is that whatever the point system is, it's gone too high. So they already part of the economy, they contributed, and they are, how they came to this country was not an easy part for them coming here, spending a lot of money, took a loan or sell their land. They are here now. Now the challenge is people, Minister, who already here, can we make it a little easier for them to becoming immigrants before we look outside?
Right. And I think the answer, CJ, to that is yes. The reason some of the point system draws have been quite high is because people are hitting those levels. I have a duty to look at that point system and how it's awarded to make sure that we are properly orienting it towards the workforce needs that are there. And that's an ongoing challenge. Obviously, people that are in that position want some level of predictability, but the market does move as well. So the idea isn't to drive down the talent level, it's to make sure that people rise to the occasion and can be part of the draw in terms of volume. There will be people, sadly, regardless of their circumstances, that won't qualify, and they will have to take that difficult decision. But the reality is that we can only accommodate so many, and no promises were made as part of attracting people here to be students or to have postgraduate work permits. It wasn't a constant renewal of postgraduate work permits. It was intended for people to learn a skill set, perhaps take it to another country, perhaps leverage it here, and as a young workforce, contribute to the economy in the way that we want to see things happen. I think what's been lost in a bit of the public discourse is how good Canada has been at making our workforce younger, and that has been driven largely by immigration. The ability of Canada compared to our G7 and our OECD counterparts to have a younger workforce has actually been quite remarkable. And it isn't sort of partisan people that are saying that. It is independent experts, including members of the Bank of Canada. That will position us really well for the next 5 years, the next 10 years, and it is exactly what we want to be happening. But that comes with challenges that deal with housing, that come with challenges dealing with inflation, which is not all driven by immigration. There are low immigration countries that have the same challenges. But that workforce youth creates a level of productivity which is slightly lower in a historical manner than those that have an aging workforce where you are at your most productive. And I think generally where we are at is a good thing, but we have to keep constantly adjusting. So when I talk to my provincial counterparts, when I talk to the members of my team at IRCC, we look precisely at that. We look at who we're trying to get, what their talent and skill set is, and making sure that we are properly getting a group of people that make sense because they've already started that path of integration. If they studied 3 years, if they've worked 2 or 3 years as a postgraduate, they're becoming Canadians. And so it's a shame if people have to take a decision to go home. But again, there was no promise made that everyone would become Canadian. The Canadian citizenship is something that's very valuable. Everyone around this room that's Canadian has fought for it and fought really hard for it. So I don't want to devalue it at the same time. But I also recognize that there's a need there. And I think there's sort of a sweet spot that we have to hit as a country that we're not quite hitting right now. And that's sort of what I'm trying to do with my provincial counterparts.
Thank you.
But when it, Mr. If I can jump in, when it comes to your question, CJ, our government has done more than any other government would have done. And look at when you talk about those young people and particularly bringing in Canada experience class, we brought in people with 75 score, 27,232 people. Then we had 90,000 other people. Remember when we brought in TR to PR, and minister is always willing to bring in new program. Don't take it wrong that we are putting a stop and whatever. And we keep on pushing that too. I mean, as a member of parliament, minister can witness that. That question I always raise with, but it's a good question.
So a couple of things that we've seen, and you pointed out to the abuse of the system that has existed. In any program that we have, there is always the opportunity for bad actors to abuse it. The business program was never intended to be a backdoor entry into Canada or an opportunity simply to come here and get Canadian citizenship. Is an opportunity to come here and invest and get the best and brightest. When it comes to startups, we know that some startups fail. That's the nature of startups. But what we did see with the program was a need to make sure that we were limiting the number per organization that could benefit from it because of the distortions that were occurring and certain actors taking too much space with some of the with some of the startup visas. So we have changed that in a positive way to limit the number of ultimate visas that an organization can sponsor, but the aggregate number will either stay the same or even increase of visas, but spread over more organizations. So that's one opportunity that was done in a spirit of reforming the program. When it comes to vulnerable employees, that is something I am looking at quite intensely, because we know that there are a number of people that are being exploited. There is an opportunity under certain circumstances to have open work permits when people have closed work permits so that they can move on to a different employer. Obviously, the solution at the end of the day isn't to liberate someone simply because their employer was abusive. You want to get rid of the abuse. You're only kind of dealing with part of the problem if you say, okay, go work somewhere else. Well, that employer still is there, and they're still being abusive. There's responsibility both federally and provincially, whether it's an ESDC or whether it's with the province, to make sure that proper business practices are being employed, whether as if that person was a Canadian citizen. So look, it would be naive to state that Canada is a hermetically closed country and that we catch absolutely everyone in the screenings that we undertake. I will not at the same time speak about ongoing investigations and national security investigations in a public fashion. It would be irresponsible to do so. When someone applies for a visa, they are subject to screening, and it's a progressive level of questioning that an officer undertakes in order to accord someone a visa, depending on the one that they apply for. When we do biometrics, that is fingerprints and other checks, we check with international partners, but we obviously cannot catch everyone. If someone lies to get into the country, they can obviously be deported once they're caught, but there are times where people do get into the country and they commit crimes. Whether they were criminalized in the source country or criminalized in Canada is often something that we have to look at quite carefully. There are people that come here and they did not have a criminal record and then they commit crimes here. That's a separate thing than what you were suggesting, which is that international criminals, as part of a consortium, come in here in an organized fashion and commit crimes. That is something that well-determined actors, regardless of the country, and particularly sophisticated gangs, are often able to get around even the most stringent immigration requirements. And Canada has some of the most robust requirements in the world when we are checking people, but it's not perfect. There was recently a discussion about the importance of getting police certificates as part of the visa process. Well, we all know how unreliable at times, depending on the country, that police certificates can be. And if we were to rely on a country that is sometimes not the most, I would say, a reluctant partner, those certificates often become quite questionable as to their reliability. So there's a multifaceted way that we employ and that our enforcement agencies employ to track people. But regrettably, at times people do get in and they do commit crimes. So well-determined actors do have an ability, despite best efforts, to get in. That's just the reality of it. It happens with the U.S. as well. But anytime we see that, we have to get smart and adjust on the fly. And when we catch people, they either get deported or they serve their sentence here and then get deported. Again, it's ongoing. This is work that we do in conjunction with local authorities, with the Minister of Public Safety, Public Security, Dominic LeBlanc, to make sure that your Canadians are safe. You know, regardless of my cabinet role, and regardless of any cabinet minister's role, our #1 job is to keep Canadians and people that are living on this territory safe, and that goes with addressing criminality, whether it is homegrown or domestic, or whether it comes from abroad. The easy answer is over the next 485,000 permanent residents, next year's 500,000 permanent residents, stabilizing to 500,000 permanent residents from the permanent draw. Now, your question is very important because people tend to assume that the people that are available, that's 500,000 that come from abroad, and then there's nothing that, or and another amount that comes domestically. That isn't the case. We do domestic draws quite consistently. And given the pressures that I outlined in my introduction, I've told my teams, I've told provinces that have a responsibility for about 100,000 of those draws to start focusing on the labor needs that they have with people that are here already in the country, as opposed to going abroad and saying, let's bring in new people. We need to focus on people that are here temporarily and make sure that we are leveraging the skills that the people have in order to integrate them into the market. They're already integrated because they've been in Canada. Presumably the pressure on housing is already baked in. So what I've asked is whether it's the federal portion of the draws or the provincial responsibility for the draws, which together is quite significant. It's several 100,000 people that become permanent residency outside the humanitarian aspects and outside the family reunification aspects of the permanent residency draws, so that we are also addressing what you said, people that with expiring postgraduate work permits that have the points necessary to become permanent residents. Now, I'll also say this, it isn't for everyone. There are many people on postgraduate work permits that will have to make a difficult decision as to whether they choose to apply for permanent residency or whether they have to go home. People that were given postgraduate work permits were never guaranteed automatic permanent residency, despite some promises that may have been made by unsavory actors. But at that same time, we are doing our utmost to look at how we can leverage the fact that we have a pool of talented people here, and we can do more domestic draws of people in the country. So that's sort of where the state of things is today for the permanent levels. I have asked my provincial counterparts to look at the measures by which we reduce the temporary residents over the next few years from 7% to 5%. That includes taking a look at the number of international students that we welcome, as well as the postgraduate work permits that are awarded as part of that program. So there will be some adjustment and some turbulence over the next 2 or 3 years. Obviously, starting this year with the decisions that we took in and around the international student program, but also other decisions when it comes to how LMIAs are granted, how the exceptions that we have given to some of the workforces to have 3 out of 10 of their workers to be from abroad, back down to 2 out of 10. Those may be decisions that we have to be a little more stringent on. But again, my worry again is the workforce, which is contracting, and there have been contractions. The labor availability is much less than it was before. So those are adjustments that we will have to make, and the immigration system will have to adjust accordingly. Arjun, it's not a matter of, obviously the views of my colleagues are very important, otherwise we can't govern properly. It's more a question of what are the views that are being reflected to them by Canada. And when we talk about broad processes of regularization, despite the tangible, demonstrable, positive impact that a broad regularization scheme can have, and you hear all sorts of wild statistics about the numbers, but also the contribution to the economy. If you look at the impact of the gray economy, and we saw a bit of that as a metric during COVID about how that gets impacted and who you have to help because they suddenly they can't qualify for government programs. It is a broad segment of the economy, and if we don't have those people, Canada's economy doesn't turn properly. And for a lot of those people, there's no reason why they shouldn't become Canadian. Some of the statistics we've seen is that this adds several percentage points to the gross domestic product, the equivalent of 3 pipelines, which is the sort of colorful expression that I use, whether you agree with pipeline. For people that like pipelines, but that it could be a significant impact to the economy. That said, there is still a prevalent view that people that are here and don't have their papers in good order are line skippers and have somehow gamed the immigration system. And there's a lot of prejudice that comes with that, and a lot of stigma that comes with it. There's also the view, widely held, that this is something that should only be done in a limited fashion for those that are the most deserving, and that would exclude sort of a broad level of regularization that other countries have tackled with, Italy, Spain, Ireland. Regardless of their form of government, there has been some controversy, but we have been able to do it as well, as recently, well, it's not so recent, but as recently in a broader sort of semi-broad way 40 years ago. So there is precedent, and I don't disagree with you. These aren't cop-outs, but they are realities that Canadians are reflecting to us in a context of a government that will be in an election in the next year. And it's a question of whether this is the right idea. I think it's the right idea. Some may disagree with me. It's also a question of where we put the limited resources of our public service to bear with a year to go before an election. And we have been criticized on our ability to execute and deliver as a government. And so foremost, what I would want to see as a program is our ability to deliver and execute and not make some broad promise that we will inevitably have challenges fulfilling, particularly before the next election. So these are very practical considerations. Again, the ultimate decision is not taken. I gave those comments in the context of an interview where I was being just quite honest about the state of play. But again, it's not a decision that has been finalized. I think, just looking forward, I would think there will be opportunities in some areas in a more limited fashion, in a shorter timeline to take programs that can regularize people, but not in the broad fashion that I outlined. Now, I may be wrong. I'm not the ultimate decider in this, but this is something that is still very much alive and ongoing discussion. So there's 2 distinct questions in there. I think the first one is the most important. How do we deal with the wave of, I would say, immigrant skepticism? And there is some hate in there. I'm not naive. There is some hate in there from people. Most people that hate immigrants have never met them. I mean, they live in relatively isolated environments. I still believe we're an open, loving country. But there is, there has been, particularly over the last few years, growing anti-immigrant sentiments in various countries that are in similar situations as us, and with the prevalence of global media, social media, Canada isn't immune at all to that criticism, and we have homegrown racism that exists, whether it's people that have been here for generations or people that become Canadian citizens and decide to shut the door. They say shut the door after. That exists as well in diaspora communities, so it exists everywhere. It's a reflection of our own frailties as human beings, of our own prejudices as human beings. But I think it's something as politicians, and I would think as well in the media, that we have to fight back against and dispel. We do ourselves a disservice when we have an immigration system that doesn't make sense. Not that that should be the reason for someone to hate another person, but when you see an immigration system that overheats or has challenges or has made mistakes or processing times that don't make sense, people compare, they contrast, they say, how come I can't bring my grandparents in, or how come I can't bring my parents in, but I can bring in a student within 24 hours, or they give me crazy examples to illustrate their points. But at the end of the day, it's about the distrust and the hate that someone bears in their heart towards another person. And I think that as a fundamental element of human nature, we have to fight back against. I'm an optimist in the sense that I believe we can prevail, but we can't shoot ourselves in the foot and create the conditions for these things to prosper. And that means fighting it back. And this is where I think your role, as much as mine, comes into play, fighting back disinformation, fighting back deliberate misinformation, and continuing to look at the brighter side of things, and focus on the facts and not rhetoric. Different parts of the country have different approaches to immigrants. Some of the polling that we see about attitudes towards immigration would surprise people. There's a tendency to think certain provinces think more negatively about that. You'd be surprised by some of the polling we see about where the most negative views towards immigrants exist. It's sometimes a bit surprising. Again, I'm part of a government that has put front and center the fight against racism. It's something that and systemic racism. It's something we need to continue to do. But we also have to do it in a realistic sense, that this is not something that goes away simply because we stand in front of a podium and say it should go away. We have to continue working on it and continuing to have dialogue, including around the dinner table, for me, the Christmas table, or for whatever religious event you have. I have relatives that have some very negative views about immigrants. I'm sure you have some that harbor those as well. You can't just shut the door on those people. As much as you don't like their opinion, you have to continue talking to them and hopefully convince them that you're right. On the immigration levels, as a statutory matter, we announced every year a 3-year forward-looking plan. Our strategic reviews have said we should probably do longer, particularly when we talk about infrastructure cycles. But right now there's a 3-year forward-looking plan that's announced every year, and we continue to do that. Always open to do more. It's important for provinces to look at that for planning purposes. Not that they always follow whatever we announce federally, but it is an important guide. But right now the clear guide with metrics from the federal government is announced every fall, and I will be announcing this fall the numbers that we plan for the next 3 years, which usually mirror the ones from last few years, but perhaps with some adjustments. Refugee claims have to be legitimate. It can't just be a way of staying in the country. That's just reality. If you have an expiring work permit, you either apply to qualify under a permanent residence, or you have a choice as to whether you stay or go. That is the reality of the conditions people were granted their permits on. Anyone that is in this country has rights. That includes the right to file a claim. But when they're not legitimate, it impacts the integrity of our system and makes us, unfortunately, look at the student system and the system that created the conditions for that, and makes us question whether we should have done that in the first place. So we would have to adjust. That's the short of it. It's frustrating for sure to see, but ideally, and I talked about this in a bit broader terms before, the pool of talent that we have here in this country from people that are students is something that we shouldn't underestimate, because those kids, and they are kids, they're young. A lot of people have put their hopes and dreams in them. We should be able to use them in the right way and be able to have them in our country as part of the labor force and eventually become permanent residents.
So, Mr. Miller, first of all, welcome to Surrey, and it was it's a very complicated and complex file. There is no single easy answer.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone tells you that immigration is easy, they're lying, but this is a job that I love. I've been the immigration minister for a year in an atmosphere where immigration is a top issue in the country. And I think Canadians, while they're proud of our immigration and proud of the big consensus we've built over the country, that is, the economy is driven by immigration, want a system that works for everyone. And that's the challenge, I think, in the next year, as we make some very difficult adjustments. Anyone that tells you they can do something in 3 months or 2 months is not really telling you the truth. It takes work, it takes really hard work, and that's what I'm here to do. I'm not here for my own personal gain, I'm here to help Canadians, and that's what I love doing.
And listening to all the media people and you from all the stakeholders and everything. So it's how we streamline because of multiple issues. And my another question leading to this one is, what is the percentage of people coming from India, Punjab and other parts of the world?
Well, we do see real pressure and from immigration that's coming from India generally, particularly when it has come to international students. A lot of talent that's coming as well, but I think that's the reality of what is the largest country in the world. Canada's population is very small compared to the population of India, and I think sometimes people forget that. But we do have migration from countries, France, United States. We see folks coming from China, from all sorts of the world, and that's sort of changed as opposed to what was happening 40 years ago. So sometimes people have difficulty adjusting their minds to that, but also they want a system that makes sense and that is rigorous. And I think those are the complex changes that we have to look at in the next year as we look at the immigration system that has had record highs, but also in an environment where the economy may be contracting a bit. So it's positive. I think we will always be a country that is built on immigration. Our gross domestic product is driven largely by that. We have to make our workforce younger, like a lot of countries in the G7 that have aging workforces. So those are challenges that I think any country, any government that's in power has to rise to the occasion.
Yeah. And as everybody mentions, you said the economy is contracting, and a lot of young people, especially on a student work visas, they have a hard time finding a job. A lot of financial pressures, and lead to that, Mr. Miller. Is it somehow you can come up with a system with all the stakeholders and your counterparts that let's handle the people who already in Canada, and then we look into outside? I don't know it will be that easy.
Look, it won't be that easy. I think we will never make everyone happy, but I think we have to make sure that we're doing things in a smart way. And when we have a domestic labor force that has begun its integration, when it's students that have been here for 3 years, they know Canada, they have housing, they're young, I think it just makes sense. Will there be mistakes? Most likely, but I think we can't just keep drawing from abroad when we have a domestic labor pool that makes sense. Perhaps in some specialized categories like construction, or healthcare, where we have those needs to come from abroad. But in others, I think we have to take a little more of a sober look at what we have already here in terms of temporary residence, of people that are probably not going anywhere, and make sure that they are properly absorbed into the population, whether it's as permanent residents or under other streams.
And your final message to Canadians?
Oh, look, lovely to be here, CJ. Thank you for doing the work that you do as a reporter. The facts matter in these certain circumstances, and sometimes these debates get a little out of hand when people distort the facts. So thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
ਹਾਂਜੀ ਮਿਸਟਰ ਧਾਲੀਵਾਲ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਲਵੇਜ਼ ਕੈਬਨਿਟ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਆਉਂਦੇ ਆ ਡਿਫਰੈਂਟ ਪੋਰਟਫੋਲੀਓ ਦੇ। ਕ੍ਰਿਸਟਾ ਫਰੀਲੈਂਡ ਆਏ ਸੀਗੇ ਉਦੋਂ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਹੈਪਨ ਟੂ ਬੀ ਇਨ ਆਟਵਾ, ਪਰ ਹੁਣ ਮਿਸਟਰ ਮਾਰਕ ਮਿਲਰ ਆਪਾਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਵੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਆਏ ਸੀ ਜਦੋਂ ਸਿਟੀਜ਼ਨਸ਼ਿਪ ਵੀਕਸ ਅੱਜ ਫੇਰ ਆਏ ਹੈ। ਤੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਮੀਡੀਆ ਦੇ, ਸਾਊਥ ਏਸ਼ੀਅਨ ਮੀਡੀਆ ਦੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਫੇਸ ਕਰ ਰਹੀ ਉਹ ਕੁਐਸਚਨ ਪੁੱਛ ਰਹੇ, ਤੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵੀ ਰੋਜ਼ ਇਹ ਇਨਕਾਊਂਟਰ ਕਰਦੇ ਹੋਣੇ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਆਫਿਸ।
ਤੇ ਦੇਖੋ ਚੰਗੀ ਗੱਲ ਹੈ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਡਿਫੀਕਲਟ ਫਾਈਲ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਆ ਤੇ ਇੰਪੋਰਟੈਂਟ ਫਾਈਲ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਰੀ ਨਿਊਟਨ ਲਈ ਉਹ ਵਨ ਆਫ ਦੀ ਫਾਈਲ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਫਾਈਲ ਹੈਗੀ, ਉਹਦੇ 'ਤੇ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਨੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਟੈਪ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਲੈ ਰਹੇ ਆ, ਸਾਰਥਕ ਸਟੈਪ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਲੈਣੇ ਚਾਹੀਦੇ ਆ। ਔਰ ਇਹ ਚੰਗੀ ਗੱਲ ਆ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਅੱਜ ਮੀਡੀਆ ਤੋਂ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਜੋ ਬਾਹਰ ਹੋ ਰਿਹਾ ਉਹ ਸੁਣ ਰਹੇ ਆ। ਜਦੋਂ ਸੁਣਨਗੇ ਤਾਂ ਨੈਚੁਰਲੀ ਸਾਡੇ ਲਈ ਵੀ ਈਜ਼ੀ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਵੀ ਉੱਥੇ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਐਡਵੋਕੇਟ ਕਰਦੇ ਰਹਾਂਗੇ, ਤੇ ਉਹ ਇਸ਼ੂ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਨੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਹੱਲ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਕੋਈ ਨਾ ਕੋਈ ਲੱਭਾਂਗੇ।
ਸੋ ਫੈਡਰਲ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਕਮੇਟੀ ਹੈ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਉਹਦੇ ਚੇਅਰ ਹੈ, ਤੇ ਬਾਡੀ ਪਾਰਟੀਆਂ ਦੇ ਨੁਮਾਇੰਦੇ ਵੀ ਉੱਥੇ ਬਹਿੰਦੇ ਹੋਣੇ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਸੈਂਟੀਮੈਂਟ ਵੈਰੀ ਸਿਮਿਲਰ ਹੈ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਅੱਜ ਮੀਡੀਆ ਤੋਂ ਸੁਣੇ?
ਦੇਖੋ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਕਮੇਟੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ ਉਹ 'ਤੇ ਡਿਫਰੈਂਟ ਇਸ਼ੂ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਨੇ ਸਮੇਂ ਮੁਤਾਬਕ ਆਉਂਦੇ ਰਹਿੰਦੇ ਆ। ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਕੁਛ ਕੁ ਇਸ਼ੂ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਆ ਅੱਜ ਸੁਣਿਆ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਉੱਥੇ ਆਉਂਦੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ, ਅਤੇ ਕਮੇਟੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਆ ਉਹ ਡਿਸਾਈਡ ਕਰਦੀ ਆ ਆਪਦੀ ਓਨ ਫੇਟ ਕਿ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕਿਸ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਨਾਲ ਉਹ ਐਕਸ਼ਨ ਲੈਣਾ। ਪਰ ਮੋਸਟ ਇੰਪੋਰਟੈਂਟਲੀ ਇਹ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਸੀਗਾ ਕਿ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਆ ਉਹ ਇੱਥੇ ਆਉਣ ਸਰੀ ਨਿਊਟਨ, ਔਰ ਸਾਡਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਮੀਡੀਆ ਹੈਗਾ ਸਾਊਥ ਏਸ਼ੀਅਨ ਮੀਡੀਆ ਔਰ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਮੀਡੀਆ ਉਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕਰਨ, ਔਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਤਾਂ ਕਿ ਜੋ ਉਹ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਹੈਗੀਆਂ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਚੈਲੰਜਸ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਸਿਸਟਮ ਫੇਸ ਕਰ ਰਿਹਾ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਸੁਣਨ ਅਤੇ ਉਹਦਾ ਹੱਲ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਉਹ ਕੱਢਣ।
ਸੋ ਆਪਣੇ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਸਟੂਡੈਂਟਸ ਵਰਕ ਪਰਮਿਟ 'ਤੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਕਾਫੀ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਹੋਈਆਂ, ਫਾਈਨਲ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕੋਈ ਹੋਪ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ ਵੀ ਕੁਛ ਨਾ ਕੁਛ ਸਲਿਊਸ਼ਨ ਨਿਕਲੂਗਾ?
ਨੈਚੁਰਲੀ ਜਦੋਂ ਦੱਸਦਾ ਕਿ ਜੇ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਬੈਸਟ ਕੋਈ ਗੌਰਮੈਂਟ ਕੰਮ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੀ ਤਾਂ ਉਹ ਲਿਬਰਲ ਗੌਰਮੈਂਟ ਆ, ਔਰ ਕੀਤਾ, ਠੀਕ ਹੈ ਨਾ। ਚਾਹੇ ਪੇਰੈਂਟਸ ਗ੍ਰੈਂਡ ਪੇਰੈਂਟਸ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਲਓ, ਸਪਾਊਸਲ ਕੇਸਿਸ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਲਓ, ਸਟੂਡੈਂਟਸ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਲਓ। ਸੋ ਹਰ ਇਸ਼ੂ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਜੇ ਬੈਸਟ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਵਾ ਸਟੈਪਸ ਲਏ ਆ ਤਾਂ ਉਹ ਲਿਬਰਲ ਗਵਰਨਮੈਂਟ ਨੇ ਲਏ ਆ। ਚਾਹੇ ਉਹ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਲਾਓ ਅੱਗੇ 7-7 ਸਾਲ ਲੱਗਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਪੇਰੈਂਟਸ ਗ੍ਰੈਂਡ ਪੇਰੈਂਟਸ ਨੂੰ ਆਉਣ ਨੂੰ, 3 ਸਾਲ 2 ਸਾਲ 'ਤੇ ਆ ਗਈ। ਸਪਾਊਸਲ ਨੂੰ 3-3 4-4 ਸਾਲ ਲੱਗਦੇ ਕੰਜ਼ਰਵੇਟਿਵ ਦੇ ਥੱਲੇ, ਇੱਥੇ ਆ ਕੇ ਕਿੰਨੀ ਆ ਗਈ 1 ਸਾਲ ਦੇ ਕਰੀਬ। ਔਰ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਆਲਮੋਸਟ ਪੇਰੈਂਟਸ ਐਂਡ ਗ੍ਰੈਂਡ ਪੇਰੈਂਟਸ ਤਾਂ ਬੰਦ ਹੀ ਕਰ ਦਿੱਤੇ ਸੀ। ਅਖੀਰਲੇ ਸਾਲ 5000 ਐਪਲੀਕੇਸ਼ਨ ਲਈ, ਇਸ ਸਾਲ 32500 ਐਪਲੀਕੇਸ਼ਨ ਲਈ, ਨਾਲ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸੀ ਡਿਪੈਂਡੈਂਟ ਦੀ ਏਜ ਜਿਹੜੀ 18 ਸਾਲ ਤੋਂ ਵਧਾ ਕੇ 22 ਸਾਲ ਕਰਦੀ ਤਾਂ ਕਿ ਹੋਰ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਆ ਸਕਣ। ਸੋ ਜਦੋਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਦੇਖਦੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਨੀਤੀਆਂ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਆ ਇਕਨੋਮਿਕ ਪਰਸਪੈਕਟਿਵ ਤੋਂ ਜਾਂ ਸੋਸ਼ਲ ਪਰਸਪੈਕਟਿਵ ਤੋਂ, ਉਹ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਾਡੀ ਗੌਰਮੈਂਟ ਆ ਉਹਨੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਬੈਸਟ ਸਟੈਪ ਲਏ ਆ। ਪਰਫੈਕਟ ਤਾਂ ਸਿਸਟਮ ਕੋਈ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗਾ, ਚੈਲੰਜਸ ਫੇਸ ਕਰਦਾ। ਉਹ ਚੈਲੰਜਸ ਨੂੰ ਦੂਰ ਕਰਨ ਲਈ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸੁਣਨ ਲਈ ਅੱਜ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਇੱਥੇ ਆਏ ਸੀਗੇ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਅੱਜ ਸੁਣ ਕੇ ਚੱਲੇ ਆ ਅਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਐਡਵੋਕੇਟ ਕਰਦੇ ਰਹਾਂਗੇ ਐਜ ਏ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਾਡੀ ਸਾਰੀ ਦੀ ਕਾਕਸ ਆ ਔਰ ਸਾਰੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇਫੈਕਟ ਕਰਦੇ। ਅਤੇ ਉੱਥੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਹੋਪਫੁਲੀ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਉਹਦਾ ਕੋਈ ਨਾ ਕੋਈ ਸੋਲਿਊਸ਼ਨ ਕੱਢਣਗੇ।
ਥੈਂਕ ਯੂ ਸਰ,
ਮਿਹਰਬਾਨੀ,
ਆਲਵੇਜ਼
ਚੜ੍ਹਦੀ ਕਲਾ ਜੀ।
ਥੈਂਕ ਯੂ ਵੈਰੀ ਮਚ। ਸੋ ਅੱਜ ਸਾਡੀ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਹੋਈ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਆਫ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੇਸ਼ਨ, ਸਿਟੀਜ਼ਨਸ਼ਿਪ ਐਂਡ ਰਿਫਿਊਜੀਜ਼ ਮਿਸਟਰ ਮਾਰਕ ਮਿਲਰ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਿ ਮਿਸਟਰ ਸੁਖ ਧਾਲੀਵਾਲ ਮੈਂਬਰ ਆਫ ਪਾਰਲੀਮੈਂਟ ਨਾਲ ਆਏ ਸੀਗੇ। ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸਾਊਥ ਏਸ਼ੀਅਨ ਮੀਡੀਆ ਦੇ ਪੀਪਲ ਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਬੜੀ ਖੁੱਲ੍ਹੀ ਵਾਰਤਾਲਾਪ ਕੀਤੀ ਅਤੇ ਕਾਫੀ ਕੁਐਸਚਨ ਉੱਭਰ ਕੇ ਆਏ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਿ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਦਿਮਾਗ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੈਗੇ। ਸਟੂਡੈਂਟਸ ਹੈ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਨੰਬਰ ਆ ਉਹ ਨਹੀਂ ਕੰਪਲੀਟ ਹੋ ਰਹੇ, ਵਰਕ ਪਰਮਿਟ 'ਤੇ ਹੈ, ਫਾਈਨੈਂਸ਼ੀਅਲੀ ਦੇ ਆਰ ਸਟਰਗਲਿੰਗ ਐਂਡ the crime and extortion. So all the possible issues brought to the floor, and Minister very calmly and very nicely answered each and every one of the questions, because Minister said they know all the issues, they are very aware of that, the criminal event of people who are coming here, ਅਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਆ। ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕਈ ਸਾਡੇ ਮੀਡੀਆ ਆਊਟਲੈਟਸ ਨੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸਟੂਡੈਂਟਸ ਇੰਟਰਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਸਟੂਡੈਂਟ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਦੁੱਖ ਦਰਦ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਮੂਹਰੇ ਰੱਖਿਆ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਉਹ ਵਿਚਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੂੰ 3 ਸਾਲ ਹੋ ਗਏ, ਕਿਸੇ ਨੂੰ 5 ਸਾਲ ਹੋ ਗਏ, ਐਂਡ ਦੇ ਕੰਟਰੀਬਿਊਟਿਡ ਟੂ ਦਾ ਇਕੋਨਮੀ, ਦੇ ਫਾਈਲ ਦਾ ਟੈਕਸਿਸ। ਅਤੇ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਨੂੰ ਪੁੱਛਿਆ ਵੀ ਇਜ਼ ਦੇਅਰ ਐਨੀ ਈਜ਼ੀਅਰ ਵੇ, ਆਲ ਦਾ ਪੀਪਲ ਇਨ Canada right now, take care of them first and then they can decide on how many people they can bring it. So ਇਹ ਬੜੀ ਖੁੱਲ੍ਹੀ ਵਾਰਤਾਲਾਪ ਹੋਈ। ਅਸੀਂ ਸਾਂਝਾ TV ਦੇ ਥਰੂ ਆਲਵੇਜ਼ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਤਾਈਂ ਆਵਾਜ਼ ਪਹੁੰਚਾਉਂਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਹੋਣ ਜਾਂ ਕੋਈ MLAs ਹੋਣ ਜਾਂ MP ਹੋਣ, ਤਾਂ ਕਿ ਵੱਧ ਤੋਂ ਵੱਧ ਅਸੀਂ ਫਰਸਟ ਹੈਂਡ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਦੱਸ ਸਕੀਏ ਕਿ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਕੀ ਫੀਲ ਕਰ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ, ਅਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਮੂੰਹ ਤੋਂ ਸੁਣੀਏ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰਸ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਇਹ ਕੀ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਆ। ਸੋ ਕਾਫੀ ਕੰਮ ਚੱਲ ਰਿਹਾ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, ਕਾਫੀ ਪੋਜ਼ੀਟਿਵ ਕੰਮ ਚੱਲ ਰਿਹਾ, ਪਰ ਇਹ ਵੈਰੀ ਕੰਪਲੈਕਸ ਐਂਡ ਕੰਪਲੀਕੇਟਡ ਫਾਈਲ ਹੈਗੀ ਹੈ ਜਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਮਿਸਟਰ ਮਿਲਰ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ। ਸੋ ਉਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਐਵਰੀ ਡੇ ਦੇ ਆਰ ਵਰਕਿੰਗ ਔਨ ਦੈਟ, ਐਂਡ ਐਜ਼ ਯੂ ਨੋ ਮੈਂਬਰ ਆਫ ਪਾਰਲੀਮੈਂਟ ਮਿਸਟਰ ਸੁਖ ਧਾਲੀਵਾਲ ਫਰਮ ਸਰੀ ਨਿਊਟਨ, ਹੀ ਇਜ਼ ਆਲਸੋ ਚੇਅਰ ਆਫ ਦਾ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਕਮੇਟੀ। ਸੋ ਇਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਜਿੰਨੇ ਵੀ ਇਸ਼ੂਜ਼ ਹੈਗੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਆਫਿਸ 'ਚ ਜਾਂ ਲੋਕੀ ਆਉਂਦੇ ਆ ਆਲ ਦਾ ਟਾਈਮ, ਸੋ ਹੀ ਆਲਵੇਜ਼ ਬ੍ਰਿੰਗ ਟੂ ਫੋਰ ਫਰੰਟ। CJ ਸਿੱਧੂ ਰਿਪੋਰਟਿੰਗ ਫਰਮ ਗ੍ਰੈਂਡ ਤਾਜ, ਸਰੀ, ਬ੍ਰਿਟਿਸ਼ ਕੋਲੰਬੀਆ।